Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to a TOD conversation with the City of Cleveland today. Just a couple housekeeping items as we get started. Please remain muted until Q&A. We'll reserve some time at the end of the conversation where we can ask our guest to answer some questions. If you do have a question, please use the raise hand, the reaction button, and then raise hand, and we will call on folks for their questions. This morning, we have Matt Moss from the City of Cleveland, a member of the project team. We have a number of folks that are working on the TOD zoning study in collaboration with our office at the County Planning Commission. My name is Patrick Hewitt, Planning Manager. We've got a number of folks from our team, including Laura Mendez-Ortiz and Luke Goals that are on the call today. From the Greater Cleveland Transit Authority, Mary Beth, Mandy, and Joey, who've been integral partners. Matt, of course, from the City of Cleveland, Joyce and Dan from the City of Shaker Heights, and Mary Kay Costello and Megan Otter from the City of Fairview Park. What is TOD? You've heard us talk about this before. Transit-oriented development includes a mix of commercial, residential, office, and entertainment centered around or located near a transit station. Dense, walkable, mixed-use development near transit attracts people and adds to vibrant, connected communities. What we're talking about, as an example, locally, includes places like Intro in Ohio City, which includes proximity to transit, both in this case train and frequent bus service, has an appropriate mix of uses with retail on the first floor and other uses on the upper floor. It has an appropriate density, it's close to the street and has limited parking and parking in the right location, in this case underneath the building. Our goal as part of this project is to improve zoning regulations and governmental policies in order to attract more TOD to key corridors in Cuyahoga County. What we've noticed as part of this project is that we've got a few things that are missing: corridor-wide land use strategies, coordinated zoning across communities, and an incentive strategy. We are going through a 4-phase study that started with the state of TOD, asking where are we today. The second phase, which we recently released, was an analysis of TOD zoning that looked at whether or not existing zoning along transit allows TOD, and found that just 5.5% of land along our frequent bus corridors do in fact allow TOD. We're working right now on model TOD zoning and best practices that can be adopted by individual communities, and our final phase will be discussing TOD financing, looking at various methods and mechanisms to incentivize TOD in our communities. For updates on the project, you can go to countyplanning.us/TOD. We did also send out a survey to folks asking people to identify any sites in your community or area that you may be targeting for TOD and what assistance might be helpful to you. That is still open. We're going to keep it open through the middle of next week or so. And you can go to surveymonkey.com/r/TOD sites to fill that out. Our most recent publication was that analysis of TOD zoning. Again, that is available on our website. If you've got any questions or would like to talk through it, please feel free to reach out to us. Today, we will be hearing from Matt Moss from the City of Cleveland, the Manager of Strategic Initiatives with the City Planning Commission. Next week, we will be hearing from Chris Hawley, the Senior Planner with the City of Buffalo, who will be talking about their recently adopted Green Code, which eliminated parking requirements in the entire city. If you do have any questions or any follow-up, you can reach out to me at phewitt@cuyahogacounty.us. And without delay, I'm going to turn this over to our guest today, Matt Moss, the Manager of Strategic Initiatives for the City Planning Commission. Matt, take it away.
Thanks, Patrick. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Matt Moss. I'm with the City of Cleveland, and I'm pleased to share with you today what we've been working on in terms of TOD, transportation demand management, and overall this concept we have of the 15-minute city. So I want to start off with a few definitions. Patrick gave a really good one for TOD, and we'll emphasize that in my next slide. But just to ground everyone in exactly what we're talking about, what we mean by the 15-minute city is it's Mayor Biz's vision of Cleveland where every resident can thrive and access their needs and amenities within a 15-minute walk, bike ride, transit trip, or car ride. It includes cars as well. Because Cleveland is generally pretty accessible anywhere in the city by a 15-minute car trip, our focus right now is on walking, biking, and public transit. And what is TOD? Well, again, Patrick gave an excellent definition. We're emphasizing that here by saying, really emphasizing that the land use pattern it's a land use pattern that centers mixed use walkable development around transit infrastructure. In general, especially in Cleveland as of late, with investments like Intro and other projects, TOD people often associate that with new construction. But Cleveland used to be a transit-oriented city when we had streetcar networks across most of our city. And many of the historic buildings and neighborhoods were originally transit-oriented. And so the focus is on new construction, but also revitalizing existing commercial buildings in the commercial corridors in the city. Finally, what is TDM? So what do we mean by transportation demand management? TDM is a complicated concept. It means a lot of different things. Generally, it focuses on understanding how people make transportation decisions. And a TDM program is meant to influence people's behavior in terms of how they use existing transportation infrastructure. And the goal is to use it in more efficient ways. And so what TDM does is it guides the design of transportation infrastructure as well as the land uses around that infrastructure so that you have other options. The goal of TDM is to maximize traveler choice. So we want to provide a variety of options for people to get around. Some way you can think about this in your day-to-day lives is if you've ever ridden your bike somewhere, maybe to the library or a coffee shop or the grocery store, and gone to that entrance and been like, where are the bike racks? If they're not really conveniently located, or maybe they're located across the street from where you want to go, having bike racks well located, that's an example of TDM. You want a strategy for either incentivizing businesses to install them or making it a regular part of your capital projects to make sure that those are located. That's an example. Another example might be providing transit passes for a business or an employer, as well as providing parking. So having options in terms of whether you choose to rent a space in a garage or get a transit pass. Putting those on equal footing or perhaps even equitable footing is another example of what TDM could mean. So sharing some background information that is probably familiar to most people on this call, given the audience, but this is an example of how Cleveland used to be. So this is census data from 1920. Cleveland, the map to the right shows census tracts in the city of Cleveland. Purple tracts are generally tracts that are 0 to 30 units an acre of housing. And yellow tracts are units that are census tracts that have over 30 units, sometimes upwards of 100 units an acre. And so Cleveland back in the 20s, this is again when we had our extensive streetcar network, we had a variety of census tracts with a real mix of housing options and housing density. Generally, you need around 20 to 30 units of housing per acre in order to support fixed guideway transit infrastructure. That could be particularly rail service, but also fixed guideway in terms of bus or bus rapid transit. Jumping ahead to today, even though the region's population has grown significantly, Cleveland's population has shrunk dramatically. So many of those census tracts that used to be very dense and have a variety of housing units there's been a lot of demolition, those housing units have gone away, the population density has gone down. So now we have no census tracts that rise to that 30 units an acre level. And so this is a situation we find ourselves in terms of when we want to design or promote land use that is transit supportive and transit effective. So we really see TOD and TDM as an expression, again, of that 15-minute city framework. That idea of these are tools we can use or strategies we can use to rebuild the city in a way that creates transportation choice and puts needs and amenities close to where people live, where they work. So we're really centering this around our high frequency transit network. So RTA runs high frequency service. In Cleveland's context, that's defined as transit service that arrives at a stop every 15 minutes or so. And these are corridors. So these are transit stations, these are bus lines in the city. And within a 5-minute walk is the area we're focusing on right now for this policy. So again, this map shows those walk sheds essentially for where you're within a 5-minute walk of a high frequency transit stop. We're calling this the TOD zone in the city of Cleveland. To give you a sense of what that actually looks like, again, some statistics here, it's about 47% of the city's population. It's 73% of the city's non-white or Latinx population. It's about 40% of the city by land area, and it includes over half of the city-owned vacant lots. 78% of all workplaces are located within a 5-minute walk of high frequency transit, and it's a little more for Black employees. And 23% of households that live within this green outline, again, within the TOD zone, do not own a car, do not have access to a car. And 70% of the households, over 2/3 in this TOD zone, have either 0 or 1 car available. So chances are most of the households in this area rely on some other mode besides driving to get around and meet their daily needs. So again, what are we doing about this? Our first strategy is that we want to basically replace parking requirements in the TOD zone with transportation demand management strategies. So this would apply to new construction, but also significant renovations or changes of use to existing buildings. So this would make it easier to build and allow property owners, businesses, developers to right size the amount of parking they may provide in their project, and would make it easier to reuse old buildings. A lot of our commercial districts are also historic districts, and we don't necessarily want buildings to be demolished. However, we require many times at least the footprint of the building, if not more, of land to be provided in parking, or you have to seek a variance. And so again, the other side of that too is establishing the TDM program itself. So we want to make those code changes, and then we also want to create the program. Next up would be, down the line would be zoning map updates. Some of you may know the city's working on a form-based code pilot. Some of you participated in some of those engagement opportunities around that, but also it relates to something Patrick mentioned earlier, where we're working with the county and this project team to come up with what tools, what aspects make model TOD zoning work across our region. In many ways, in our TOD zones, much of the zoning there is only permits single or two family uses. And this next slide sort of gives you an example of that. You can see, I know there's a lot of information going on here, but this is essentially the TOD zone, right? This is an analysis of the land within that 5-minute walk of high frequency transit. It's about 31 square miles, 40% of the city. The majority of the zoning is either single, two family or single family, and another 12%. So again, it's about 45% of the land area allows only 2 units of housing. Another 12% is industrial, which doesn't permit housing by right under our zoning code. So again, most of the area within a 5-minute walk of high frequency service, you can't actually build more than 3 units of housing without a zoning variance. So what are some key takeaways? Zoning, again, on 60% of the land within a 5-minute walk of high frequency transit doesn't permit transit supportive housing density. We have over 17,000 vacant lots as well within that TOD zone. So that includes city-owned land and also private vacant land. And we need flexibility here. So we need to permit a mix of housing, from accessory dwelling units to missing middle to large-scale multifamily projects. We need that diversity, not just a number, not just hitting a gross number of units. And we really see this condition as a public emergency. It intersects various aspects of policy areas, including public health, climate change, our municipal finance, the health of our finances, as well as just general human thriving and the experience people have living and their daily lives in neighborhoods in the city. Why are we focusing on parking? This comes up a lot and in a variety of different conversations. Just some key facts, again, relating to specifically Cleveland and the conditions that exist in our neighborhoods. The diagram to the right, by the way, is from the American Planning Association. It shows just how much space parking takes up. 1.5 parking spaces is almost as much space as you would need to have, certainly as much space as you would need to have, start having a 1-bedroom apartment. And it takes up a significant amount of the space that could be used for a 2-bedroom apartment, for example. But again, going back to some of the statistics about Cleveland, roughly a quarter of our households do not have access to a car. 70% of households within a 5-minute walk either have 0 or 1 car available. 1 in 5 Clevelanders are just too young to drive. They're children, they're teenagers, and they go to school, and they either need a ride, or they take the bus, or they walk, or they bike. And in a lot of ways, these mandatory requirements are exclusionary. They require parking is not only, it's exclusionary not only from a physical perspective in terms of you have to dedicate land just to this use, but again, because there are significant portions of our population that are either too young to drive or can't drive for a variety of reasons, and our land use policies require a transportation mode that is inaccessible to them. There's also an opportunity here. We have over 200,000 jobs within our transit area, so our job centers are well served by high frequency transit. And again, more than 3/4 of the people who work within Cleveland work within an area that's served by high frequency transit. And we have over 2,800 acres of vacant land that could be reused within that same area. So how are we doing this? What exactly is TDM? And so basically what we're doing looking at how other cities have done this, cities like Buffalo, which we'll hear from next time, and other cities on the other side of the coast like San Francisco, they've come up with similar programs where projects are assigned points based on their anticipated impact on the transit system. And we know that the bigger your project, the more people working, living, the more people taking trips to your store, for example, the more demand there is on a transportation system, parking, driving, bus trips, bicycle trips, all of that stuff. And so we're workshopping right now this tier approach to a point system where, depending upon where your project falls, if it crosses one of these thresholds in terms of dwelling units, retail square footage, or total number of employees, your project would be required to meet a certain number of points. And to complement this, we're developing a menu of options. So it's a variety of physical and programmatic things. It could be anything from providing bicycle infrastructure as part of your project, or offering to subsidize your transit passes for your employees or for your residents. All of these things earn points on the menu of options that put together a TDM plan. This is an example of what that menu looks like. So we have a variety of, like I said, a variety of options that have been assigned points. And again, depending upon the size of your project, you'd have to put together a plan that meets the minimum point threshold. And so I have an example of a project that we can briefly show you. We had a project in our University Circle neighborhood be proposed. It was 261 dwelling units. And even though this program isn't effective right now, we asked them if they would be interested in piloting and going through and seeing what it would look like for their project in order to meet these requirements. It was a project that it's located in a high frequency transit area. They wanted to build less than the code required amount of parking. And so these are some of the options they came up with. They decided to provide transit passes at a 40% subsidy for their residential tenants. They agreed to make some streetscape improvements to the benefit of pedestrians, bicyclists, and transit riders. They're providing a variety of bicycle options, including a bike share fleet for their tenants. So if you live in this building, you can basically check out a bike and ride it around the neighborhood to wherever you might need to go. And they're also going to put a shared mobility hub for dockless scooters and bikes on their property. This is an example of the project in case you haven't seen it. It's called Stokes West. It's on Stokes Boulevard in University Circle. And here's an example of the site plan. It's at the corner of Stokes and Cedar. So it's a large number of rental housing units, some townhomes as well. So, and it's an example too, I think, of projects that we've seen across the country where they are providing some parking. So what we're doing is getting to a point where there's greater flexibility and greater applicability to the context of where these projects are going. What does a TDM plan actually look like? It's really similar to many of the development applications we already require through, whether it's through design review or through the city's building code process. So we would require an application, a demonstrative site plan, supportive documentation for why they're picking the measures that they're picking. And then we also are working on a registration process through our division of licenses and assessments that would require, this is how we enforce more of the programmatic options in the plan. So an applicant would have to get a license every year for the first 3 years just to certify that they're staying in compliance with their TDM plan. So we know every year that they've agreed to, for example, subsidized transit passes, that they're actually doing that. And so right now our plan is that you would, if you're an applicant that's subject to TDM, you would get your plan renewed for the first year every 3 years. And then after that, you could renew it every 3 years, assuming you're in good standing. And this would allow us to also collect fees to manage the program. So what do we mean by just demonstrative site plans? We all probably seen a site plan or familiar with, in general, what a site plan might look like. But we're developing concepts. This is actually a site plan that was done about a decade ago as part of a planning process around the site that is now Intro in Ohio City, so on West 25th and Lorraine. And we want to put together some site plan examples that show the right kinds of call outs to make to demonstrate, I'm putting the bike share program here, or this is where my bike fix-it station is going to be and it's worth the requisite number of points, that kind of thing. They can take a variety of forms. And so we're working through some options in terms of how this might look in terms of being clear to applicants, but also clear to the city professionals who will be reviewing the plans. So again, you're going to hear from Buffalo next time. They have adopted their green code since 2017. The green code has done a lot, and I certainly won't take up any time in terms of going over the details of that. But one key aspect of that is their green code eliminated parking requirements citywide, and they require a TDM for new construction over 5,000 square feet and renovations with a change of use over 50,000 square feet. And I just wanted to highlight some key takeaways that we've learned from talking to Buffalo and from doing some research, that they found that a lot of new projects, rather than building parking, developers shared parking. What's exciting about this is if you have a developer who, whatever project they're working on, they feel like they need to or want to, it's important to their project to build a garage or some other type of structured parking. They can actually, it allows us to work and help plan proactively with projects that might be happening at different phases along in a certain area, to work out arrangements where parking might be overbuilt in one area that is then shared in another. Or if a developer ends up building more parking than tenants might lease, they can lease that parking out to other businesses or other users in the area. Even new parking that was built, again, became shared parking. They've had some experience with that in Buffalo. They also found it easier to build transit-oriented development. So that's really the connection here with this program into TOD. They found that it was easier to reuse existing buildings, and that new mixed-use projects popped up in transit-friendly areas where they were previously uncommon. And then again, the last point I mentioned earlier, adaptive reuse projects became more viable. So what outcomes are we looking for? We want to permit more affordable housing products. We know that parking is expensive, even if as a user of parking, if you're a driver and you're parking somewhere, you might not necessarily pay for it, it still costs something. Surface parking spaces can cost upwards of $5,000 a space to build, and garage parking is even more expensive, oftentimes 5 times as much to build. And we know that parking adds costs to rent. So it costs money to build that parking. Developers need to capitalize that cost to recoup it into the rents that they charge for residential, but also for commercial space. We also want to legalize many of the treasured commercial and cultural districts we have. Again, Cleveland was a streetcar city. We had much of the city was built out before we even adopted a zoning code in the first place. And these structures are difficult to repurpose, mainly for a variety of reasons. It can be a challenge to incorporate ADA access. It can be a challenge for these buildings that don't meet modern building codes. And our zoning requirements to then either adapt them to include parking or to tear down structures around them to provide surface parking only further makes that more difficult. And so we want to ease that burden to make them more viable. And then we want to enable more services and amenities to be available within a 15-minute walk, bike ride, or transit trip around our commercial corridors, our neighborhood nodes, and just other projects themselves. If we require so much space around projects to be built for parking, it makes it harder for other uses to occupy that space. And it makes it harder for people to walk, bike to other things that might be adjacent, because it pushes those uses further away. And we want to mitigate that. We know that this is something that can be successful, and that the amount of parking you get in a city or in a neighborhood isn't necessarily dependent upon how much the city mandates through code. Because especially in Cleveland, downtown Cleveland hasn't had parking requirements for decades. And I don't know anyone who would say we don't have enough parking in downtown. And so with that, I'd like to wrap up. I know we've got plenty of time for questions and comments, so I'll turn it over to you, Patrick.
Thank you, Matt.